took me almost 200 days, but I finally finished writing a book on penguins. Now that I think about it, I think writing it on paper would have been a lot easier. Hey kids, Adam here. Today we are going to talk about adding analog goodness to your DAW. What is analog goodness? You've heard me mention this a number of times, and I even said last video I didn't really even have a good term for it. Analog goodness is that warmth, that richness, that extra harmonics, saturation, distortion, compression that analog gear inherently adds to a sound. Now, back in the old days, analog gear was all that was available for recording. You had these giant, console boards that took up, tables and tables and tables in a room. You had these big giant hardware preamps, super expensive gear, mic preamps, EQs, compressors. You had all this stuff that these days, especially in the year 2021, you can emulate in like a little laptop and a cheap little interface and some software plugins. What we've lost though in the digital world is that warmth. And you hear a lot of people talk about, oh, analog recordings sound much warmer and vinyl sounds better than CD. Over time, there's been all these arguments. What we cannot argue about is that analog equipment, when used properly, will add warmth and richness and things like that through what's called saturation. Saturation is essentially harmonics, distortion, and compression in small bits added to a signal. And what these plugins these days have been able to do, they emulate these old pieces of gear. Engineers have worked, they figured out what the resistance, what the frequencies are, and then they write their plugins to emulate this piece of gear. Two of my favorites are like an 1176 compressor and a 1073 EQ. Why would we want to do this? Well, we want to add that vibe. Some people call it a vintage vibe. My band does like a funk rock type style. And in that style, we want to emulate kind of that vintage 70s sound while having it still sound modern, having it sound crisp and clear. So, like I said, analog plugins, they add saturation, compression, small amounts. They can make things sound thicker, fuller, sometimes even brighter, depending on what plugin it is and what you're emulating. So what are we actually trying to do, and what are we going to accomplish with this? Well, if you think about when you went to an analog studio, what was your signal path? Let's say you're doing vocals, for example. You have your microphone, you plug it into a mic preamp. For that, I'm going to use the Scheps 73, which emulates a 1073, very, very popular, widely used preamp. After that, you're going to a channel on some sort of board. SSL boards are the most common, but for this one, I'm going to use the Kramer HLS. That will emulate essentially my mic preamp going into that channel on the board. So the next step in the process is your recording tape. For this one, I'm going to use Kramer tape. For waves, you could also use the J37. There's a ton of other plugins out there that emulate a tape saturator. And finally, you're going to emulate your analog summing or your master channel. For that, I'm going to use the NLS channel by Waves. So let's go into Reaper. I'll show you the exact plugins I'm using, how I'm using them, how I'm setting them up, and give you a couple examples on each channel, and then show you a before and after mix. Here we go. All right, I'm in Reaper here. I have a project that I've fully edited and gain staged. So you'll see every fader except for a couple here that are throwaways are all sitting at unity gain. I've gain staged everything as close to -18 dB as I could. And I'm ready to do this, what I call the analog plugin phase of my mix. So let's start here. I'm a bass player. I've done the bass tracks for this song. Let's take my bass track and we'll take a look at what we're going to do and how we're going to affect this. If I'm being humble, it's a well-played, well-recorded bass track. It sounds pretty good, and I've mixed my bass exactly like this. But let's try adding some of this analog goodness on. So what I want to do, I have created a FX chain. If I go into the FX window here, do FX, add FX chain, choose, I call it analog chain mono, and it has 4 plugins on it. Now, if you want to make your own FX chain, get all your plugins set up, get all the parameters set up. If you're doing an EQ, I have it like a default EQ with a high pass and a low pass and a couple different other things set up. Get any settings you want, get everything figured out in the right order. Go to the FX menu here, choose Save FX Chain, give it a name, and you've saved the FX chain off so you can recall it later on. All right, so what I'm doing here is in each plugin, I am going to increase the preamp a little bit, and then I'm going to take the input, bump it up so the view meter is reading right about 0, and then I'm going to match the output so that we're having the same gain. Gain staging in this is very, very, very important because you don't want a false positive of having something that sounds louder being better. You're going to make sure you're having the same gain. And plus, the only way you're going to ever be able to match these on a pre and post mix, like I will show you in a little bit, is by gain staging everything. As soon as something's louder, it's going to automatically sound better. It's going to make this whole exercise null and void. So here, I'll play the bass. You can see it's peaking about -5. I want to bump this up so it's about 0. And really, I want to hit it anywhere between -3 and +1 on the VU meter. And you can peak a little bit. You saw it went up to, +2 or so. We just don't want the needle to all sit over there. So this is probably a little hot. I'm probably going to back this off a little bit to 10 dB. And then I have this link IO button in this plugin. Some of them have them, some of them don't. That's very, very helpful. And that's all I'm going to do for this one. Go to the Kramer HLS, and we'll do the same thing. This one doesn't have an IO link, so I'm going to drop the output volume, and then boost, and then I'll match later once I get the settings set. And 11 looks good. It's always good if I can go to 11. And again, this, I just bumped up the preamp a couple notches, didn't touch any of the EQ. So Kramer tape, for this, I just chose a full reset of the plugin. I linked the input and output, and I'm just going to bump this up. And I'll back that off a little bit. And then the only one that doesn't have an input gain is this NLS channel. I found it does add a little bit, so I've taken the output down to -4. That seems to be a universal level match for me. So I'll play this before and after the plugin. So before, and then after. Now it's the same volume, but it sounds a little bit richer, a little bit fuller. Now you're not going to notice night and day with this. The whole point of this is to not make this sound like some giant change. In mixing, everything you do in mixing is really thousands of tiny little moves, or hundreds or millions, or however you look at it, to make one big mix. So I'm making all these little tiny moves on each channel, and then the sum of the whole is going to sound much better, much fuller, much warmer, much more analog goodness. All right, let's do another track. We'll do a guitar track here, and I'll just solo one of these in the verse, the same spot I was playing the bass. We'll play it. A decent sounding guitar, but let's add that analog goodness to it here. Add my FX chain. It's the same chain, it's a mono, and we'll play it and adjust some of these levels. That looks good for that one. I'll admit I've cheated and I've preset some of these numbers, and I probably did it right on the guitar. If you can look at this, it's almost perfect. But basically just want to make sure you're hitting that 0 and you output gain to match. Kramer tape, this could use some. And then finally an LS channel. And we'll do before and after. And with the plugins. And it's a little bit more. It's not volume, it's a little fuller, maybe just a hint of brightness, warmer, richer, that kind of sound. I want to show you one more track just because it's the only stereo instrument I have here. Get this organ sound in here. Really good organ sound. For this, I did the same thing, but I saved a stereo version of the chain. And it's the same plugins, just the stereo version of them. So we'll do the same thing. We'll do 73. HLS. Kramer tape. And finally NLS channel. And then before and after, no plugins. And the plugins on. And keep the organ sound here, you can really tell because it brings it out. It kind of jumps out in the mix. It adds some excitement in that upper mids to highs. A little bit of brightness. Doesn't make it muddy, but it kind of pulls it out and makes it, just analog goodness. All right, so that's that. We'll be back in a second and I'll show you what every track looks like with all these plugins on and what I do next. Ooh. All right, so we're back in Reaper. I have, as you can see, all of the channels have effects on them. Everything is mono except for that one keyboard track, and I have a few vocals in here as well. Now, I don't want to have 4 plugins on every single track like this. So what I want to do is I want to essentially print these. And the problem is Reaper doesn't have a bounce in place. Now, some of you may say, oh no, you can freeze or you can do save as a take. There's really nothing that's going to emulate exactly what I want to do. I want to have brand new tracks that I don't have to worry about going back to these waves. I want to clean up my project directory. I don't want to have these things glued or anything else. So I want to render these all to stems. What I'll do for drums here, I'll highlight all my drum tracks, not the folder. I right click, I choose render freeze tracks to mono stems, I mute originals, and I let it go through. And we wait. And it's almost done. All right, now that the rendering's done, what we want to do here is basically get our new track set up and delete our old ones. So in your panel here, if you take one of these tracks that were just redone, highlight them and drag them down. Make sure they're at the same level that the previous track was at, and let go. You've essentially moved all your tracks down. This just makes it easier to delete when you're done. What you want to do is you want to go to the beginning, and I want to line up these tracks, and I want to line them up the exact same way I had the other ones lined up. So I put cursor at the beginning of one of the previous tracks, right click and drag to select all of my other tracks, hit the split, right click and drag again, hit delete. And then in this, the drums, I don't have any space in between anything, so that's really all it is. You can see the bass here. I would have to split a couple of different points on a couple of different tracks, same with guitars and things. So then what I want to do is I want to select all of these tracks and delete them. Now that I've printed these tracks out, I don't need any of the plugins on them. And now that I've matched them up, they're identical to the original tracks. So I just want to delete these. You can do right click, remove tracks. You can hit the delete key and hit yes. There's a couple other different ways you can do it. And then I have the SWS extensions installed. So I can go right click on here, do track color, SWS track color, and set children to same color. And it will colorize my tracks. The only other thing I like to do is I like to go down here in the track name and delete out this dash stem. I won't show you how to do that, but it's kind of an annoyance for me. If anyone knows how to have these automatically renamed properly without putting the dash stem in there, that would be great. But essentially what I do is I do this for every track, every group of tracks. I go through and I render, get rid of that. And then when I'm done, I can go up to File, Clean Current Project Directory, and it's going to show me all of these old tracks that I don't need anymore. So what did we really do here? Can we do a before and after comparison? Absolutely. Hold on a second, let me get things set up. All right, and with the magic of video production, we are back here, and I have a before plugins and an after plugins. And let's play a little bit of the before and after. I just selected out the same part in everyone. It's kind of the part we've been listening to. I've done just a real quick fader mix, and I did a couple phase things here just to make sure everything's good. I don't have any other plugins on, nothing on the master fader. So this is just going to be a raw fader and pan mix. So here we go. Here's before the plugins, before I did any of the analog. Wait for it. Goodness. And now after, this is with all the plugins on. And we'll do one more. Before. And after. Yeah, I mean, you obviously heard a difference. There are, very, very subtle differences, but there's more. It seems the bottom end is more well defined, a little bit less muddy, a little warmer. There's a little bit more top end. And these are exact. I copied and pasted the tracks to make sure that all the moves and all the volume levels are exactly the same. If you look at the master fader here, it's left as -10.3, -10.7 on the after. On the before, it's -10.4, -9.4. So actually before is a little bit louder than the after, but the after sounds better. All right, I think this is an interesting little experiment. I've been doing this on my last 4 or 5 mixes. I really, really, really like the effects that I get. It makes it, I don't want to say it makes it easier to mix, but I think it's just a mental thing where I think it already sounds better. So I already have a better platform to start with before I start adding plugins on. And then I find I'm making fewer moves as far as EQ and compression and things like that, because I have these tracks that are in an even better state than they were to begin with. So that's it for this video. Hope you liked what you saw here. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Otherwise, do the standard thing, like, comment, subscribe, hit the little bell thingamajigger so I can, whenever I upload a video, you get notified and your phone blows up and you can swear at me or whatever. And if you really want to help, link down below to buy me a Coke. Until next time, have some good analog goodness. Or something like that. Analog gooder. Analog gooder. Something like that.